Wholeness and welcome. This is Josh Dippold from integratingpresence.com. And today I'm with Indra Rinzler. Indra, how are you today? This evening.
I'm really good. Nice to be with you, Josh. Yeah, it's after dark. I'm not sure which Indra is going to come out now that it's nighttime. So,
well, we'll see, I guess. Yeah.
This is late for me.
Yeah. Well, it's even later because you're on the West Coast and I'm in the middle of the country. So,
I mean, it's later for you, but it's not that late for you, but it's late for me. Happy to be here.
No, well, it's a pleasure having you. So, Indra reached out to me and on a pod matching service, and I think I don't think we need to mention names, but of what it was. But it seemed like we had a good match when there wasn't a lot of maybe particular people to match up with me, so it was a good thing. And Indra, why don't you just start off with a brief, maybe a bio, and then what you do and what you're interested in, and what you'd like to talk about today.
Well, I'm glad you didn't ask me who I was, because that's a difficult question. But I identify with being a Vedic astrologer. I've been on the spiritual path 50 years. And what it has come down to is that I share a series of modalities in life readings. I have other modalities that I use to help clients, but I basically, my focus is on helping people to wake up to who they really are. And so I use science and intuition, that I use observable science, you might call them pseudosciences, but observable sciences that give me data in order to understand patterning, in order to help people to become aware of their personality. But I'm not talking to the personality, I'm talking to the essence, because that's who we really are. And the idea is to help people to let go of who they think they are and become who they are. I'm not interested in making a better story. The better story is no story. So that's what I'm focused on.
Well, this is one of the questions I often have fascinated with folks that are on a spiritual path. And we don't really have to go into this too deep, but it's fascinating just from the get-go of this notion of self. What is self? I know I've got the whole Buddhist teachings on it, and I don't need to go into that. I do that on my site and stuff. But I think there's also this notion of self with capital S, self with a lower s, and just for my ideas and my understanding and my notions of it, I don't cling to any of it. I just like to know how people learn from how people perceive this thing we call self. Yeah.
Well, that's an easy question.
Right. I know. I just jump right in the deep end right away here.
Yeah.
Right?
So here we are married. Now we're engaged. We're practically married. So I agree that you've got self with a small s and self with a large self, and we like to anthropomorphic everything.
Yep.
Anthropomorphize everything. And the thing is that the larger self is essence. It's a consciousness. It doesn't have form, and you can't really understand it because it has no form. And the small self is who we think we are. This is the personality. This is the id. It's the one that's doing everything. It's the one that's thinking it out, and that's the one that we have to protect. It's the one that we're insecure for, and guiding us to run obsessive behavior in order to not let everybody know that we're insecure. So that's the small self. And those kind of concepts are, it's good to get a little bit of a definition. This is no criticism or anything, but the thing is that you don't want to lock into anything. And I read this quote recently in a book. He talked about the phrase, so I've heard. So I've heard. And the power of so I've heard is you don't commit to anything. And so rather than say, I believe, you say, so I've heard. And I did I mentioned this to a lady. I was setting up a podcast appointment, and she said, "We'll see you in 2 weeks." And I said, "Well, the calendar says I'll see you in 2 weeks."
That's right. Who knows what could happen? It's that old joke, how do you make God laugh? Well, you tell him your plans, right? So
Yeah. But the idea being the so I've heard is that you're not owning anything, that you're free to not be attached to any position. He calls them he used this word positionalizations, like personalities. It was positionalities. The positions are these things that we hold on to, and the idea is it's a little bit like, is it Go Fish, where you try to end up with no cards? So you want to end up with the least number of positions. And so I've heard is very freeing.
you
It's really
know,
incredible.
it is a really wonderful, lovely thing because a lot of the Theravada Buddhist suttas start out, "Thus have I heard," right? And I've got a buddy on that in San Francisco that we do a monthly Ask Us Anything with, and he named his YouTube channel "Thus I Recorded."
Yeah,
So
well, that's probably where it came from. This is a modern author who's pretty enlightened, but I mean,
very well, so could be,
every
yeah.
the darn thing is when you deal with ancient teachings, everybody's kind of talking about the same thing.
That's right. It's so wild how there's so many different commonalities and things are put just a little bit different way. And this positionality, or what was it called?
uh Personalities, so positionalities, that
Yes,
you're
positionalities. That's
it's
great. Because I was for the longest time, I was clinging to ideas. I mean, that was where I was really identified with. Okay, this is the way it is. Okay, well, you have to see things this way, or you're wrong. And that whole trip, right? And so, it's so just like a relief when I can let go of that and not have to be right all the time, and just consider all these different viewpoints and not be clinging or attaching to any of them too. It's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
so that you just defined the spiritual path is shedding, being dry and then getting insights, and then being dry and getting insights, and shedding and letting go and releasing. I don't think it ever ends, because
Well, mhm.
they say at the highest levels that, well, you think, oh, well, it'll get easier because you're more evolved, but they ask you bigger things. Like he
That's
says,
right.
the final doorway is the letting go of life. It's the surrendering of life. And I don't think he means the physical body, because I think at that point you're not attached to the physical body. It's the whole jumping off the diving board into the water, the water of I was going to say void, but it's not a void, but the emptiness of whatever ethereal and causal plane have in store. That I've read this before, that the highest levels, their ask is big time for that level. It doesn't get any. It's just like parenting. I always said, you have kids. I
No, I
always
do
said,
not know. And I'm not married either. So
okay.
attention, ladies. I'm not married. Okay, so go ahead.
So what I always said as a parent is that it doesn't get any easier, it just keeps changing. And so you say, well, when they're in diapers, it's, or before that, you have to nurse them, and then in diaper, as they get out of diapers, you're free with that, but then they can run more. And at 16, you don't have to change any diapers or take care of them, but then they got the car and they're out, and you don't know when they're going to get back. And there's just different kinds of things that happen. You're pushed on different and more maybe more sophisticated, deeper levels, especially because whatever is triggering you are your triggers. So it's you don't have so many. The triggers are simpler, when the kids are younger. And so I think this is a mirror. Everything's a mirror for everything. We talked about Indra's net. That's Indra's net, is that all points have mirrors, and everything mirrors everything else. And there's nothing that's not connected to anything. And so I think this is what I believe, that the lessons it just keeps, the ante is up, but it isn't much different than day one.
There's this teacher that I'm really into still, Matt Kahn, and he talks about, what if consciousness was always expanding? And it's an interesting concept to consider, right? And
Well, the
the
universe,
trigger, real briefly, I don't want to throw too much in here, but the trigger thing was that, I tell people I'm grateful when I get triggered, actually, because it shows what kind of work needs to be done. Not like a lot of work that needs to be put under a spiritual microscope and really done a lot of things on, but it says, oh yeah, this is the work that's presenting itself now. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. The universe is expanding, and so it's again, how can you put words on to describe what's going on? But
That's right.
it's possible that the word consciousness it's expanding may apply to what's actually happening.
That
And
it's a fascinating concept, and going into the formless realms, and I think it's the Hindu stuff and the Buddhist stuff too, is like, I think it's called dhyanas in maybe Sanskrit, and it's the jhanas. So the first four are the form states, and the next four are the formless states, and then some of the formless states get into these really refined states of consciousness, like infinite space, or I should say boundless space. Then remove that, and what's left? Boundless consciousness. If that's removed, what's left? Boundless nothingness or no thingness. And the most subtlest level is, if that's even removed, what's behind that is neither perception nor non-perception. And so when we get into such refined states of consciousness of that, there's really not much language that can be put to it, right? So they're formless
no,
to begin with, and then how do you really put language to something that refined? Some people have, but yeah, I anyway.
that is the nature of it. It is beyond words. Thank God that but it gives us an idea. Even those words you were using, I was feeling lifted, lifted up and expanded. So
They talk about the Brahma realms and whatnot, right? So I was thinking,
sure,
why don't we get into some of this, your modalities that you help folks with? The big
sure.
one that really, I mean, the huge one that I really pretty much ignorant. I wouldn't say ignorant. I just haven't studied it a lot. Well, that would be anyway. Vedic astrology, right? There's some
Right.
usually the one here where most people are familiar with in the West. I think it's just called Western astrology, but Vedic
Right.
astrology is significantly different, right?
Well, it's like we say in Thailand, the same and different. So it's got they all came from the from Mesopotamia, 600 AD, 600 BC. The trade routes took them both ways, and so the planets are relatively the same. Western, of course, uses asteroids and the outer planets that traditional Vedic doesn't use. The signs are the same, and the house meanings are the same. They can be different, but I mean, Western astrologers don't agree with Western, and Vedic don't agree with Vedic. And if the Western and the Vedic don't agree, then it's just part of the game. The biggest deal is that the chart is cast slightly differently. The Vedic chart is cast with sidereal time, that's star time, and the Western chart is cast with tropical time, which is the relationship of the sun and the earth, which is the seasons. And so in the star time, we take into account the sky behind the sun, which isn't the same every year. It's on a 26,000 year orbit called the precession of the equinox. And this is at the same time the most important part of astrology, and the most difficult and the least understood. But the idea being is that the Vedic chart is cast 24 degrees backwards, and as time goes on, that 24 degrees will increase. About 400 AD, the two systems were the same, and now 1500 years later, the two systems are different. And so they're both they both are helpful, and they both can be relevant, but they have a different frequency. And again, I'm not trying to make any predictions. I'm interested in helping people to wake up. And I find that this positioning based on the sidereal time kind of is like a key. It's like the key to unlock the lock of who we think we are. What are the energies that we that that we become obsessive about, that create the possessive, the compulsive behavior that we then are that we compensate for in our behavior.
It's I'm really kind of out of my depth when it comes to this. I'll just give a little quick personal thing. I haven't had very much. I've never had a Vedic a reading or anything like that. It's just maybe a humorous anecdote here. I did get a chart drawn up, but I didn't have a reading. So I gave, and she printed out the chart, and I didn't want really a reading. It was just kind of like snatch it and go, right? I didn't. I don't know. Maybe there's some superstition in me handing over my birth time to someone that I don't really know and trust, and yeah,
Sure.
so that's one thing. But then I think I went up to another astrologer at like a crystal fest, and I said, "Okay, what's my sign?" And I think she was close. So I don't know if that's fair to do to somebody, out of the blue like that, to test them. But so that's just kind of a joker I am, or I'm not really a joker, but I mean, I don't know. I like to push people sometimes when I can a little bit, but in a good natured a way. And so okay, yeah, that'll be enough for now, and then maybe I'll circle back around to possibly what you said. Well, hang on, no, I take that back. One other thing is I just feel like when I get into topics like this, I take me back to high school math, where the highest I got was trigonometry. And geometry I really understood, because I could see the visual there, and the math came along, and it just really kind of made sense and clicked, right? In algebra too. But when I got into trigonometry, I was getting these good grades, but I didn't understand it. It was the weirdest thing. Somehow I was getting good grades, but to sit down and explain what was going on or how it was happening, I was completely clueless. And there's a lot of subjects where I just have like keywords, right? Like I listen to this astrology podcast every once in a while. It's been a long time. And I hear these keywords and terms, but I don't know what they mean, like trines and squares and aspects and lunar mansions. And so I have all these keywords, but nothing really matches. It's kind of like me navigating a new city here too. I know that little neighborhood here and there, but when I try to get from one neighborhood to the other without the GPS, for some reason I haven't got in there yet. So it's just I have so much respect for this, because it's such a huge, vast system. And well, here I go with more stuff. But one thing that really fascinates with is the patterns it can show throughout, larger society too. I know it's a lot of people are interested on the individual level. I like showing like the whole, if you draw a chart for like a specific thing in time, or even the earth sciences that I'm really into, like a specific place, and how all this relates and connects. So there's plenty of the comment here, but before I forget, I also want to throw this last thing in, is that how the changes in astrology, you talked about a few of the changes in the system and how that happened. I was fascinated how that happened and why. And also if this is going really into the origins of this. So if we know of any of the stories of how this came about, the who's and why. So that's enough for probably for a good while here, all that stuff.
Well, let's see. It's a buffet. It's hard for me to decide.
Yeah.
You
Take
know,
what you want first. Yeah.
I went back to I went back starting about 10 years ago. I went back and I read a lot of books on the history of astrology in order to know where it came from. And I was interested in that the Mesopotamians was a very high culture 5,000 years ago. And we still have millions of their business tablets their bills and their receipts and everything that they have in tablets. And they were a very advanced society, the first city states, and the whole reality that when people come together, that a guy could be the baker for everybody rather than just the baker for his family. And so a lot of changes went on. And then what happened is that omenology came in. And omenology was the idea that if you ask a question, and then the birds, where should we go war, east or west? And then the birds come by and fly east, that means that we were going to go east, and that we should war east, or maybe we shouldn't go east. And then there was, when to plant, and is it going to rain, and all of these important questions. And so they developed this very sophisticated omenology, and they developed a class of citizens who were kind of in charge of this, priests and things. And the I remember now that the advisors realized that if they got it wrong, that they would get killed. So they came up with this workaround, which it's the birds. Okay, and they killed millions of animals for 1,000 years in sacrifice, and beautiful women, in order to figure out which way their liver was pointing, in order to be able to get that. The gods were so smart that they put the liver the correct way. So this went on as we were in higher times, Mesopotamia and before. I think astrology was used in a higher way, that it's a vibration, it's a very high frequency, but it is, like everything else, it's been dumbed down into, at worst, newspaper astrology. But also, to my cup of tea, 50 years in, is all the opinions. And I'm not a fan of aspects particularly. I'm not a fan of holding people in a place. I'm not a fan of good and bad. I'm not a fan of that you can't overcome it. That it is merely that the story. I think that there was a lot of astrologers had a lot of, I call it, billable hours in making problems, and then they could then fix those problems. So they developed a lot of, that you needed, a prayer wouldn't work for everything. You had to have its own prayer. So this was we were getting dumber, that the societies had smarts and then lost it. And then as we come back now, Galileo, in Galileo's time, before that, who was the one before him that he died? He wrote the book about
Is it Copernicus or no?
Copernicus. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think it's Copernicus. Yeah, that he wrote the book that saying that he got from his Arab tutors that in fact the Earth circles the sun, and he didn't want to cop to it because he was going to be killed. So he wrote a book that was released on his deathbed. I think it was the first time he saw it, and so he was dying anyways. It didn't matter, and it took 100 years after that for Galileo to come along, and he was only in prison for the same truths. But he invented the telescope, and that was an important part of it. So that's a little bit of the, I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but when I read, I put this all together, and there were other aspects, Ptolemy and how systems that he created and how we're still using some of those, and they have a relevance for today. And the Greeks did a lot. They got off kilter with the epicenters, with the 59 epicenters, to try to have an explanation about how the Earth, the sun circles the Earth. But so there was some good or bad, in the sense of there was some right and some wrong, but not that we know anything about, all my theories are only my beliefs, I suppose. I mean, a lot of people agree, but we don't really know squat about any of it. But the fact is that when I look at a person's chart, I can see things about them. I had a client at a fair this weekend, and they, it was just, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that, yes, 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 yes. And it's like, I didn't plan it. There he is. and I'm able to, with the different modalities, I'm able to, and what's the point of it? The point of it is to be able to, once you understand your patterns, is to be able to let them go, is to not be, is to see through those particular stories.
That's right. It's like we can't really change what we don't know, we're not really aware of, right? That's always the first step for changing something. And this is a cool way to another like lens or another angle to another tool in our toolkit to see things that we weren't previously aware of. Or sometimes I guess it gives people validation and maybe more impetus for change, and more support as well for things they know they need to make a decision on and have been putting off. And so when that time's right, can add support for that perhaps.
Well, people come to me at a particular time, that when they're really at a wit's end to a degree. They don't come because they were looking to have a spa day. But I want to comment on one thing you said, that you don't need to know. I mean, at the beginning, you kind of need to know in order to release things, but eventually you don't actually need to know what it is in order to release it. You only have to identify it in your body and then release it, but you don't have to know what it is, and you don't have to know why or where it came from.
Beautiful point, because early on in my practice and path, it's like, oh, I just had to know. It was so fascinating. I'd sit with a question and I would get an answer, but then that answer would only lead to more questions, and I would just the kind of this obsessive wanting to know, having to know. And it was just like such a relief when it's like being okay with not knowing. And then also, yeah, in the body. That's right. We don't have to have language or a cognitive aspect of it, that awareness, just about all of our experience can have a physical correspondence, right? Actually a sensation or feeling in the body. And a lot of times, a lot of that trauma is stored in certain areas of the body. And so when that can be felt and seen or felt or known, it can just release. And we don't really even there's no requirement to know what it is or how it is. I mean, that's kind of like icing on the cake sometimes for people that are into knowledge, more cognitive knowledge and whatnot. But yeah, it's totally okay not to know. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand,
Mhm.
when there are things that you can clear without knowing, but then there are things, and maybe a step, maybe a preliminary step for most people is to get the clutter. If I clean the kitchen, I do the dishes and clean the kitchen, and then my wife comes behind and then she cleans the kitchen. So there's levels, and the fact is that they all work together. They're not actually separate. They're just two sides of the same coin, and it's just the process, and it doesn't really matter. But the fact is that we kind of go, when we're painting the deck and I'm doing the scraping to get the paint off, then I use the steel brush for a while, and then I use the broom, and I use that a while, and then I forget what other tool I have. I use a little bit of that, and then I use this, and get it down. Then we wash it, and then we scrub it again.
That's
So
right. Different processes and tools. That's right. Yeah. Well, so now the second modality you were telling me about was is it the Enneagram? Is that how I've heard it pronounced a couple ways,
absolutely,
I think maybe.
Enneagram
Yeah.
of personality.
Okay. And I think I heard about this years ago, but then I think it was on secretenergy.com as I learned more about it. And but not too much. I haven't dived deep into this. I know a lot of esotericists are kind of into Enneagram, and now it's there's also it goes into different areas and modalities of life and walks of life and stuff like this. But so you're the one whatever you focus on is more on the personality level, right? What can you say about this for folks?
So the Enneagram is a Greek. It comes from Greek. It means nine-sided figure, and so it's actually a combination of three geometric shapes that are combined that have 9 points, and we could put different objects at the points. The Gurdjieff, who gave it to us, he put musical notes at the points. He put planets at the points. He put foods at the points, but he didn't put personalities. And I believe that was because while psychology was known, it wasn't really codified. And it was a student of his student who was a psychologist and spiritually bent, who put personalities at the points and made up these 9 archetypes. And so it became a psychological archetypal system. But the thing is that it's not only an incredible archetypal psychological system, but there is no end game in psychology. You can use it to help you to know yourself better, and you can have better relationships and more compassion for other people. But there is no getting out of your story, because all you're doing is observing behavior. But as a spiritual tool, the Enneagram is unique in that it gives you your core story, and then it gives you the goal of to let go of the story in order to come back to the moment. And I believe that these archetypes are not just archetypes, they are the archetypes. These are the 9, for whatever reason it's 9, the 9 Judeo-Christian archetypal behavioral BS stories that have been developing over the last 2 to 5,000 years, that is so sticky and both visible and invisible at the same time.
This, like when I get asked and go on different shows and what, like, tell me a little bit about yourself, and it's just like this awkward moment. Like, I think the last time I answered it was like, well, what we say about ourselves, that's actually what we become. You say something about yourself, and that's pretty much what you are. You kind of like, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It can be, and it's like I'll have to spend more time on that. And so it's like, I don't know, maybe I take it too seriously, because it's really odd like that at a certain point where, and then some people, can't, that's who, they can't see anything beyond what story they've told themselves. And the archetypes really fascinate me too, because I heard this notion that the tarot is actually, or one way to look at it is human archetypes. And I thought that was really fascinating too.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, they are. I use a tarot deck. At the end, I after 3 hours of 3 modalities, I read them back what they say at the beginning in the reading, and then I say, well, do you have any questions? Let's do a tarot reading. So I pick a card, one question, one card. If they have more than one question, then we do more than one card. And then I read from this really deep book. And I like to say that at the end of the reading, they give an affirmation, and they usually take 3 hours down to 8 words. And it's really very inspiring. And it always really is, almost always is, it just hits the nail on the head. And the thing is that when you're in, what they have in common is that when you're in an open vibration, then the information will come, and it can come, the same information can come in different ways.
Very cool. And that like that technique of like distilling it down to 8 words, it's kind of almost like a mantra that will tie everything together and just kind of give that entry point into the whole thing that you've just done for them, right? Is that kind of fair to say?
I think it acts like a I guess I gotta do it. It's like I can, like the Enneagram. Yeah, I'm kind of that way, but it's kind of a lot of work to get over it. And then the astrology, and then the Wheel of Totality, and it's like, okay, well, he talks a good game, but I don't think so. And then you do the tarot card, and it's like, oh, geez, I guess that's it.
That gels it. So 2 things in the Enneagram. Gurdjieff is just a fascinating figure, as you well know. Did he ever? I was curious now if he ever said where he got that from. If it just came
No.
popped out of nowhere. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't give away his sources on that, right? So, or not. But then the
Well,
other
he
thing
was.
is, if go ahead.
I was just gonna say he's a mysterious man,
Oh, to say
and
the least. I
we
love
don't
this.
know we don't know whether he made it up or whether he got it from somewhere else. And it's so interesting. This is why the Enneagram is so mystical, because it's said to be a Sufi tradition, but the Sufis don't take any responsibility for it because it was all underground. But there are a few historical references to some systems that were similar. And again, we could have had a similar, the esoteric meanings have been lost. And in this age where we're mirroring older, higher yugas, generations, that information is coming back. It just naturally pops up again. And it's the synchronicity of people coming up with new inventions at the same time, or you and your cat both think, well, let's go down and have a beer at the bar. It just good ideas happen for both,
It,
for
it,
more
it,
than one.
That's right. It's amazing how these cycles happen. It's forgetting and it's remembering, on micro and macro levels. And speaking of synchronicity, I was just going to mention this Sufi story about Gurdjieff that I think says that Gil Fronsdal tells that, or that I heard it from him anyway, that he like, I don't know, he spent all this time getting to this one Sufi master, if I'm getting this right, and he finally got there, and he said, I want you to teach me how to breathe. And then the Sufi master just cracked up laughing. And then after that, he agreed to, to train him in different breath techniques or whatever it was. I forget exactly where, but it's just not the typical thing. And yeah, I mean, the books are there, and there's plenty of other stories and methods there, but he definitely was a fascinating figure. Do you think it would be okay to just name the 9 archetypes really briefly,
Absolutely.
or some of them?
No, I'm happy to go around. Can I give a little bit about them or just the names?
Absolutely, yeah, whatever you'd like.
So the I'll give them to you. The thing is that there are three. What it's based on, and people aren't always aware of this. I like to give this is that there are three core instincts. They're centers of intelligence. There's anger, emotion, and fear. And while we have all three of them in us, one of them is at our core. And then there are three reactions to energy coming toward us. And so there are those that go outward to it. They're called extroverts. There are those that pull back from it. They're called introverts. And there are those that live in an actively neutral spot where they can act extroverted or introverted, but they actually live in a neutral spot that I call quality control. They're kind of checking everything out. And so 3 natural directions times 3 unique instincts gives us 9 unique energetic Enneagram vibrational signatures. And so the one is the perfectionist. This is anger inward, and they need everything to be done the right way, because at their core they're feeling useless or inadequate, and so they want everything to be the right way. How do they know what the right way is? They make it up. Okay, and people say, well, these sound so bad. So I mean, on the high side they teach you about perfection, but that doesn't tell you much about the story. So the idea is that you have to work through the bad stuff in order to be able to, you have to work through the compulsive sticky part in order to be able to live the higher part. And then when you live the higher part, then you can teach it to other people. So now the other 2 anger is 8, which is anger outward. That's the boss, or the challenger, and they're the strongest personality. They have, I like to say, they have all offense and no defense. They're covering up this teddy bear in their heart that they don't want you to see because they don't want to be vulnerable. And the neutral anger is the 9. That's the peacemaker, and they accommodate other people. They disassociate from themselves in order to create the sense of harmony. The only problem is that they're creating a disharmony by disconnecting from themselves. So that's the anger. So the anger, the emotion the 2, 3, and 4. The 2 is the outward. This is called the helper, and they take care of other people. It looks selfless, but it's actually a very manipulative story that's really kind of sneaky in that they're trying to create codependency in order to get love from them that they don't feel within themselves. And issues with pride. 2, 3s, and 4s all feel shame. 3 is the neutral. This is the producer, and they are the achievers in society. They're the ones that are always busy and achieving for social status. And that the 4 is the inward emotion, and they are the individualist, and they're the most sensitive. These are the musicians and the dancers and the photographers, and they use in Facebook, they use adjectives like crazy. They're so expressive and so feeling. So now the fear types, you have the fear inward, which is the observer. That's the 5, and they use information as a way to protect themselves from their feelings of inadequacy. The 6 is the loyalist. That's the fear neutral, and they're about anxiety and doubt, that they need. The loyalty is that they need to learn courage and duty, and so they have to leap the canyon of with faith. You can't mentally get out of this story. And the 7, which is my particular story, the enthusiast, we're outward fear. And so we're the greener pastures people. We're the people that love to have a party. We're lighthearted. We're storytellers, and we're actually something that I learned a few years ago, unbeknownst, is that we're not actually running toward. We're actually running away, and what we're running away from is our feelings.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it covers the gamut, doesn't it? I mean, yeah, that's a brilliant, I mean, I don't want to use the word modality, but I mean, yeah, an archetypical system that pretty much sheds a lot of light on, yeah, just about any kind of combination come up with. What I was striking me is how many of those different things that I've experienced or seemingly experienced, right, on some seemingly different stages of life, and also maybe some were just kind of surface level, or maybe it's that I've noticed that in other people too, you know.
Well, there are you know, as you get into it a tad deeper, there is teachings within this, is that you change your persona. You put on a different mask at different times, and so when your coping strategy, you go to your wings, and that's the number on either side of your number. So if you're a 5, that would be you take on parts of the 4 story, or you take on parts of the 6 story. And when that doesn't work as a 5, then you go to your stress place, which for a 5 would be number 7. So then you become spontaneous, but your spontaneity isn't the spontaneity of a 7. Is let's go. The spontaneity of it is that is a compulsive spontaneity. So it's a stress place, and everybody goes to a different number in stress place. And so it's really interesting that it's not exactly that the extroverts become introvert and the introverts become extrovert, but it's like about 70% of that. And as you move around, you take on others, and you can also take on others. Absolutely, you can take it on by being around it. You can also take it on by not being by being a mergy type. 2s and 9s are mergy types, and there are people in astrology who have sun with other planets, with 2 or more other planets, who don't know themselves very well, and so they take on other people's stories, because it's better to have a story that isn't yours than it is to have no story. I mean, ultimately you want no story, but you've got to come through your story to the reality of no story, not the story of no story. That isn't freedom.
Well, that's what we were talking about at the beginning, right? This notion of self. And I just wondering how this would be, you know, how this might muddy the water to consider this for someone who's, I guess the official term, you know, in psychology or whatever is dissociative identity disorder, or something like multiple personality types. And you hear these people in the alternative media talk about alters and all this type of psychological programming and stuff. And then, but it's just also for people that, are, I guess, more empathic, where they just kind of can feel into what's going on with other people. And you talked a little bit about taking on other people, but and sometimes it seems like empaths, they don't really have much of a choice. I mean, I guess there is, but it almost seems like it takes more energy to not empath at a certain point for some people than not. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I had a teacher who was empathic and at birth, and he was a hermit because he couldn't handle all of the noise. Being a 9 in particular, he couldn't handle all the noise and all the disharmony. He didn't want to hear it. So yeah, it's a particular problem. Everybody has, not everybody, but everybody has their own stuff. And there are some really interesting particular patterns and difficulties that people have, like all of the fears. I was reading somewhere recently all the different kinds of fears that you can have: fears of claustrophobia, and fears of heights, and fears of bad smells, and fears of, I mean, everything.
And pretty much, maybe you know about this, but I've heard most of our fear is, and I'm sorry if I cut you off there.
No, go ahead.
That most of our fear is learned, right? I think somebody was saying that it seems like there's only a few fears we're born with, or something, like fear of loud noises, because I guess that signals kind of danger, and fear of falling backwards, because there's people can crack their head open really easily. And I want to say
Yeah,
a lot. Mm-hmm.
I heard about that. I don't know about the fear. I think that some of the reactions come from previous lives. I mean, I mean, I believe in reincarnation, but I'm not a fan of that I got knifed 8 lifetimes ago and that I gotta obsess on it. And I think you just got to deal with it right now. But the
Well,
fact is that I think there are some previous traumas that can come in, and I think there's a pure essence in the baby, but so I don't know whether it wakes up or remembers, or who knows how it works. But I do think that I do know that we were taught in India that if you're feeling depressed, it isn't necessarily your depression.
Well, that's right. And this goes into just the broader spiritual teaching of not really taking anything personally, right? The benefits of that, because in a way, it's not really personal, anything, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, but it is personal in the sense that you really feel it. And the fact is that I can say that I don't particularly like bridges. I don't like heights. I think bridges are really good to look at, but not so good to go over. And I limit which bridges I go over. So maybe that was from this life. I mean, if anything wasn't from this life, it would kind of be that. And it's like, I'm not putting all my eggs in that, and I don't have to have a puja over it. But the thing is that I wouldn't say it's all this particular time. Things sneak in.
It's a real good point about the past lives, but the bridges is interesting because I know there's some overpasses here, and I'm in the middle of the country in St. Louis, Missouri. I mean, just if the traffic light is on an overpass that's over the interstate, and sometimes I can feel that when the wind's blowing, can feel my car just very slightly moving. It's like, wait, should it be doing that? Or you get a big truck or a lot of weight on there. It's like, oh boy. But that's
No, I think you want it to be doing that.
Well,
Because
that's
if it
right.
didn't do
Good
that,
point. Very good logical point. Because if it didn't do that, it would be more brittle, right? Yeah.
yeah.
But now the past life thing is fascinating because yeah, we meet these people. I shouldn't say, well, these people, right? We've all met somebody who's just really kind of obsessed with the past life, and they won't. I mean, it's just like, oh, they're just. It's just, in a past life I was this because of this. It's kind of like the thing. Well, my parents, because of my parents. Well, yeah, and how much clinging is there to that? And also, maybe for like me, who hasn't really got into past life memories yet, and I haven't even done a regression, that, it's okay either way. But if it is from a previous incarnation, right, that will show up or reflect somehow in us if it's significant to be cleared anyway. So, right, to really have a vivid memory or recall or detail of it happening, I don't think is as necessary as long as we can address what its influences are in this very life here and now, right?
That's my opinion.
Yep.
And another aspect of this that I thought you were going to bring up is that when we run into people that we kind of feel like we've known before,
That's like you get
that
all
we
these different
feel.
flavors of deja vu, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I met some people. I met my wife in India in the ashram, and that was pretty instant. I traveled with a young woman years ago, and somebody told us we'd been married 4 times,
Wow.
and we came from different parts of the world and different ages, and there was just something. That just happens that you can't really explain, and you don't need to explain. The point is that you you neither believe nor you disbelieve, and
That's
the
right.
fact
And
is that
oh,
it
go ahead.
feels deep. It feels like there's a depth, and that depth maybe isn't present time.
Very good point. I mean, if you think if there is no, I mean, a lot of metaphysical questions are kind of put to rest with if there's no discernible beginning or no discernible end, well, then that means we could have been done everything. We could have been everybody, everything multiple times. So I mean, just the
Absolutely.
possibilities are just they're pretty much endless of what could have happened or what will happen if that cycle after cycle, right? And yeah, it's really as far as past life stories, I've had a friend, and she and her husband, and she was saying that the three of us had been involved in several lifetimes where we would all just be in different relationships together in one thing. And you hear this stuff, and you hear all these even scientific studies where they'll take a small child and they will tell stories to their parents about, oh, I used to be this person in this village, and this is what my place looked like, and this was what my life looked like, or something like that. And none of them have ever been there in this lifetime, but they go there and it's exactly
Yeah,
as it says, and there's story after story recorded about this. Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Amazing thing, this life.
Oh, indeed, to say the least, right? So this, I guess, this third modality, the Wheel of Totality. Now, this is the one I haven't
Yeah.
heard about before, so I'm interested in this too.
Okay, so this is not surprising you haven't heard about this. So I don't know anybody else that does this but me. But so the idea here is that that each house contains awareness on the highest level, and they're mundane. The astrology that we practice is the mundane of these awarenesses. So like the 10th house in the Wheel of Totality is love, and when that's the action in the world, and so in mundane astrology that's your career. And so the idea is that each house contains awareness, but if you don't have a planet there, then that awareness is a blank spot for you. And so I overlay the natal chart onto the Wheel of Totality, and I'm able to express where you have awareness, what qualities you have and abilities at, and what qualities you don't. And the qualities are: the first house is discovering who you really are, and this is the if you have that ability, then you work on discovering who you are. And if you don't have a planet there, then identifying yourself is a bit of a pin the tail on the donkey blindfolded. I can't really find myself. And so the second house is duality. And so the people that have a planet there, they can live in gray. But the people that don't have a planet, they tend to live in black and white. That things are either right or wrong, or good or bad. And they have a limit. They can be judgmental. I mean, you can be judgmental for a few different ways, but this is a really good way to get judgmental, is when you don't have a planet in two, and then you start living in black and white and limiting yourself and limiting your points of view. Is really hard. That's like an oil that really keeps the engine going. When you don't have that one, it's hard. So 3 is about mind. It's the ability to be able to see through the stories of the mind. And the 4th is about heart. And it's about being grounded enough to be able to open our heart to feel not only compassion for everybody else, which is easy, but compassion for the self, which isn't so easy. And so yeah, when you don't have compassion for the self, then you sit in the suffering that is needless, because if you had the compassion that you can give Sally that compassion in that space, but you can't give it to yourself. And so five is God, and God is about eventually realizing that there's a cosmic intelligence. And when you realize that, then you can accept what is and you can trust what is. But if you don't have a planet there, then you have trouble trusting and accepting what is. And so you're always hesitant, and you can be controlling. This is the anti-control. Six is about practice. It starts as meditating or doing yoga, and it ends as 24/7 living in undisturbed consciousness, that on the mat and off the mat have to be the same. This is the uphills of life. It's the physical plane difficulties in a mundane astrology. But practice, that is the opportunity to overcome the difficulties that we have, to keep practice, beating our head against the wall. That's the sixth house. The seventh house is seeing through conditioning. People that don't have a planet there have trouble seeing through conditioning, and so they have uh, a difficulty, because they're shadow boxing stories that aren't even theirs, and they can see it when you point it out to them, but it's really hard for them to discern, especially after 30, 40, 50 years, what's my story and what isn't my story, because they don't have a planet there, so it makes it difficult. And the eighth house is no separation. It's about that there is no other. It's about the realization that we're all connected, and in that connection is the ability uh, to um, to not feel separate, to not get stuck in separate stories, that we're separate and isolated and alone. And nine is about emptiness. It's about, I like to use the example of nature. And so if you have a planet there, well, everybody can feel emptiness in nature, but the people that don't have a planet, by the time they get back to the car, they're thinking about, what am I going to get at the grocery store and what am I going to make for dinner? They lose that sense of emptiness. The people that have a planet there can stay in that emptiness, and can get into it without being in nature. The 10th house is love. Love becomes an attitude. It doesn't need an object. It's just a way of being. It's not directional towards anybody. It's not directional towards anything. It's just an energy that fills everywhere and everything, and for you. And the 11th house is realization. This is a difficult one, needless to say. It's the surrender, the realization that starts with feeling one with the sunset, and then it's the realization that the fruit grows on trees, and then it's the realization that the fruit ripens and falls on the ground, and it's the ultimate trust, being 11 opposite from 5, the little trust, that I am always protected. It's the ability to be able to, the people that don't have a planet there have a lid on their ability to progress, because they can't, they again, they have trouble with control, because they don't realize that they're not actually in charge. There is no in charge. And the 12th house is about changes. It's transcendence and impermanence, that everything changes, and that impermanent and transcendence is that things change right away. And so people that don't have a planet there, they don't do well with change. Uh they limit themselves by this lack of vision. And so you're not stuck. They're not easy. I tell clients the ones they have, and they think, oh, this isn't so bad. And then I tell them the ones they don't have, and it's not so easy. But about late 40s and 50s, we start working on these. And why is that? Is because in 20s and 30s, we're building up our ego, and we're not really interested in our deficiencies. So that's the Wheel of Totality. It's a very powerful, a very high vibration teaching, and it kind of takes your breath away, because I've worked it with probably 500 people, and it just hits based on the formula of using the sidereal chart, and whether they have planets or not. It's only the inner planets, and I use the north and south node of the moon, but I don't use the outer planets, because they are, like you were talking before, the generational, and that's a different kind of astrology.
Well, right on. That's beautiful, Indra. And I guess we'll start wrapping up a little bit here. I don't know. It's almost like now I feel like I have to not have to, but I'm definitely more fascinated in maybe getting maybe a sample reading or something. But who knows? We can maybe discuss that off air or something. But is there anything else you want to wrap up, and then also give people your contact information, how people can get in touch with you, and any other thing else you'd like to plug or promote here?
Well, I just to think the thing is that so we shift from galactic gases to we shift into modalities and very practicality and groundedness. And so the fact is that they're both they're not only are they in essence the same, but they go hand in glove. And the idea of the galactic gases is that it is beautiful, but in order to be able to get there, in order to be able to increase our frequency so that we can enjoy it more, that rather than have just our foot in the door, we can actually be invited in and sit down at a comfortable chair, as it were, as a metaphor. The thing is that that's what the modalities are for. That we have to do. We have to keep doing our work. Is that the the Hollywood overnight success who's been working for 20 years. This is the nature of it. And years ago in India, I was told, and this is, I think, really powerful, is that most of people's what people have when they have an awakening experience, I've heard that called a pre-awakening experience, and that it takes 15 or 20 years of study and balancing in order to be able to come back to that place that you were at and understand it in its depth. And we use the example of Ramana, the famous Indian teacher, who had a near-death experience at 16 and was enlightened, and he still meditated in a cave for 19 years by himself. And so people who, not pointing at anybody, but from my point of view, being on the path so long, that there's a naivete, as it were, probably not the right word, but I'm not trying to make a judgment, but just that there's a stage, as it is more of a stage, and that's the awakening is when you touch into something, but the idea is to be able to make it of you that you're always there. And so that's why the galactic gases and the modalities fit together. So I have a website, indrarinzler.com. I have an email, Indra Rinzler, they're both all one word, at gmail.com. I like to offer on the podcast that if people want their Vedic chart, like you had your Vedic chart, I'm happy to send it to people, so that just email me your birth, time, date, and place, and I'll send you back your chart and a little thing on how to read it. And I thought today that I didn't even realize that I could offer the Enneagram test. And so I have a simple one page, 5 or 10 minute Enneagram test that I'd be happy to send to people too. Just send me an email and ask for those. Let's see, anything else? Yeah, just this is a challenging time. This is the best of times, this is the worst of times. This is, we've been waiting for this for millenniums. uh I've been waiting 50 years and I don't even know what it is. This could be the culmination. Who knows? We've been waiting for the earthquake, the big earthquake in California, for a long time. not to, knock on wood, but the thing is that it doesn't really matter what it is. The fact is that this is today, and tomorrow will also be today, and this is to make the most of it. Whatever you need to do, if I can help you in any way, I'm very happy to do that. If people have questions, I'm easy to reach. And I have Facebook, that I have a big thing that people look me up and go. There's a lot to read on there.
Well, right on. I plan to put those in the show notes. And yeah, this thing about it, it's this notion of endless awakening too. And even in Zen, you've got the things of like what is it? Sudden awakening and gradual awakening, and then this whole notion of integration too, right? And expansion and just ongoing. So yeah, it really is it's a beautiful way to wrap up. And Indra, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I learned so much, and it's kind of a privilege to finally get to the point where I can meet more wise elders on the path too, and learn and grow and be counseled. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Josh, for having me. A
Mhm.
pleasure to be with you, and God helping God. So much love and blessings. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye now.